Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 23rd of September 2021 meeting for the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. The Thompson-Nicola Regional District acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district. And today we are located on the Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. I'd like to remind everyone that September 30th, next week, is the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The day honors the lost children and survivors of residential schools, their families and communities. Public commemoration of the tragic and painful history and ongoing impacts of residential schools is a vital component of the reconciliation process. The TNRD stands in unity with the Secwepemc and our other First Nations partners in recognizing the very first Canadian National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And we are wearing our Every Child Matters shirts as a symbol of our commitment to that partnership. Yesterday was the first official day of fall, and boy, did it ever come fast. It's nice to experience the fresh, crisp air and see the changing leaves. And driving into Kamloops yesterday from Merritt along the Coquihalla, there was a side road that I noticed was filled with puddles. And I thought, what beautiful, beautiful puddles after the summer that we've had. I never thought I would look on a puddle with that sort of an affectionate eye. I'm very pleased to welcome our new staff to the TNRD team, starting with Amanda Ellison, who's the new General Manager of People and Engagement. Gabriella Stevens is our new Human Resource Advisor, and Joe Kang is our new Services Coordinator for Electoral Areas Southwest Region. It's with pleasure that I introduce today the library screenwriter in residence, Ken Hagan. Mr. Hagan is a film and TV writing veteran with over 20 TV series and specials to his credit. He has written and produced numerous screenplays. He's going to mention fundraising today, but he was very quick to point out to me that this is not an occasion when he is doing fundraising. He's not here to put the bite on us today, so you needn't fear that. For the next 3 months, Ken will be engaging rising and aspiring local screenwriters by delivering inspirational workshops and one-on-one consultation with writers from across the regional district. Full details can be found on the library's website. Please extend a warm TNRD welcome to the library's first screenwriter in residence, Mr. Ken Hagan. I'd also like to introduce Sadie Hunter, who is attending the meeting today as alternate director for Director Mike O'Reilly. And we have a schedule of upcoming meetings and events. On the 20th of October, we have a Utilities Committee meeting. On the 20th of October, we have a Solid Waste Management Committee meeting. October 21st, Emergency and Protective Services Committee. October 21st, a regular board meeting. October 22nd, Committee of the Whole. And October 22nd, Policy Review. You will find today in your blue folders only any mail you have received and a TNRD notepad. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to sit back and fasten your seatbelts for Ken Hagan's trailer for his upcoming film, Outrunners, shot right here in Kamloops. And I think Dave is going to cue that up for us.
You love movies, and you're going to love Outrunners, the pandemic comedy we're filming during the pandemic we're actually in. Hi, I'm Ken Hagan, writer-director of Outrunners, a feature-length comedy thriller that's like game night meets The Hunger Games.
Filmed right here in BC.
To finish this awesome film, we just need 25,000 Canadian dollars.
We're gonna be late. Let's go.
Outrunners is about two ex-reality stars, Emily and Todd, who are racing to save the life of Emily's mother.
Did you run normal?
I am.
What the hell is that? Your gait is so weird.
You run so weird.
So weird.
This is how professional runners run efficiently.
On what planet? Just run like a human person.
While they're being chased by reality show camera drones and deadly snipers. I wrote Outrunners right here in my hometown of Kamloops during the pandemic lockdown. I turned the wildest stories into a suspenseful comedy.
Yet again, a deadly airborne virus has swept the planet and it's killing people in droves.
Why stroke?
Is the president okay?
She died week 1.
Shia LaBeouf.
Dead.
Oh my God.
That's the thing that impressed me the most is while all of us were dealing with the trauma of being isolated during the big lockdown, Ken Hegan just got busy writing a hilarious action thriller script all about the pandemic, capturing all the craziness and all the absurdity that we've all been dealing with. He's really created something that's really fun.
Is this happening?
Nice. I believe you should always make the movie that you want to see. And I really want to see this movie.
Kamloops has such a unique look. You're going to 100% believe that we are shooting all over the world.
Action! I've directed 11 short comedy films, and I've been a writer on 20 TV shows.
This is my 4th feature production. I've been art director and production designer of some big shows.
Major makes movies look fantastic on a dime.
I love film. It's part of me, and this film is something that I truly believe in, and I think you're going to love it when you see it.
You're going to love our lead actors, Amanda McEwen and Matt Graham.
That's really sexy.
You're flirting? There's no time for flirting.
Hey, there's always time for flirting.
The locations are gorgeous, the actors are hilarious, and the story is laugh out loud funny.
All right. But I'm the muscle and you're the doorknob toucher, okay? You're the real shirt. The hand sanitizer before they drink it.
Amazing.
A huge thanks to our sponsors, Aviation Gin, Kevin Smith Beers, Main Street Brewing, and all these awesome supporters.
Honestly, I can't wait to screen it at the Rio.
We're done filming, and now we're adding music and visual effects. And that's where you come in. We need your help to finish this film. Back our film for as low as $75, and you'll get exclusive rewards and experiences.
It's such a great script capturing the moment, and I think it's a really good business opportunity because I think people are really going to want to see this film.
This is your opportunity to invest in our community.
So you caught the virus, hey?
There's no virus. It's total scamdemic horseshit.
This is like Hollywood on your doorstep.
I'm so excited about this movie, I decided to invest, and I think you should too.
So thank you, and we'll see you at the premiere.
You love.
So, Ms. Moore or Mr. Hagan, is there anything to add or?
Mr. Hagan.
Well, just want to thank you for this opportunity to come say hi. This is such a great opportunity to be the screenwriter in residence in my hometown, to just talk with locals about great scripts and what makes a really great movie and TV show. It's a huge honor. And I just wanted to add, I read about the mayor's missing official chain. That would make an amazing opening to a small town mystery. So come to me if you're working on a script. All right, thanks a lot.
Fantastic. And thanks to the TNRD board for all of their wonderful support and enabling the library to deliver programs such as this across the regional district. Many thanks.
And thank you, Judy. So that takes us to our agenda. Are there any additions to or deletions from the agenda? Mr. Hildebrand, I see.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Not really an addition, but just an update for the board, if I may.
Yes, by all means.
So I just got a quick BDO forensic audit update. I wanted to provide a brief update on where things are at with the forensic audit work. As I know, there was an expectation that we would have the findings in a report by September. We are now expecting a final report by the end of October or early November. As you have all heard from the updates that BDO has given the board and the public over the course of their investigation, there is a tremendous amount of data and records to review and analyze, and this takes time. The scope of the work has also been expanded, something we have always said could happen if recommended by BDO. We will still honor our commitment to transparency and will provide a summary of the auditor's findings presented and made public to the extent that we are legally able to, keeping in mind that some of the limitations we have around privacy legislation. So I just wanted to provide that update to the board, and we'll be bringing that update for you hopefully by the end of October or early November. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hildebrand. That takes us to the minutes. There's a recommendation with respect to the minutes for the meeting September 1st, 2021.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Public hearing minutes for May 13th, 2021. Recommendation there. So moved. Any discussion? There's no discussion. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. That brings us to bylaws, zoning amendment bylaw number 2744 with respect to the Adams West Forest Service Road, Adams Lake, PC. There is a series of recommendations.
Move recommendation 1.
Is there any discussion? Director Hildebrand. Let me get this right. Director Rothenberger.
Mr. Chair, we received a letter by email yesterday from Mr. Ortner, I think in regards to this. I just wanted to make sure that it gets on the agenda, or at what point it would be considered that that input.
After number 2, I was told. Move number 2 and then it can be brought up after number 2.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion with respect to recommendation number 1? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Director Watson opposed. That's carried. Sorry, Director Rain.
Director Rain.
Just a procedural question. I appreciate we go to public hearing on this, but if we haven't had a referral from forestry, and then the other bodies I thought about was have we given referrals to the neighboring First Nations on this? And the only reason I ask, I appreciate procedure. We could move the motions, we could go through the public hearing and have the debate at that time. But every time we go further and further, this is more and more costly for the applicant. And I just think it is important that we have upfront the information from forestry on this road. And secondly, there should be references to both Adams Lake and Little Shuswap Lake bands.
Thanks, Director Rain. Is there any comment with respect to Director Rain's concerns? Ms. Sadilkova.
If I may, through the chair. So this application has been with the board previously in the spring for first reading. It was referred to the ministry on April 21st of 2021. We did not get a formal reply. We sent it again a couple months after that. At this point, we can follow through with them a third time. However, the applicant is in conversations with the ministry about the Forestry Service Road, so they are aware, and we'll follow up again. The proper time to collect all the information and bring it forward and debate it with the public is at the public hearing, which we anticipate would happen in October or November. And I don't know if does that answer the question?
I think so. Director Ray?
Whether the issue of referral to the bands, was it referred to the bands?
I would have to check in the file. I'm sorry, I can't answer that at this moment.
Thanks, Ms. Sadilkova. Director Stamer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Savokova, this land that's in question, is there also an additional piece of land to the south of that that's included in this application, or is this only on the land that's there right now?
No, it is only on the 30-hectare parcel outlined in red. However, at this point, only the lake side, so that would be the eastern, I'd say just under a third, a quarter to a third is zoned C4 for commercial recreational. They would propose to extend that zoning over more of the land. So there's already a resort there. The line of and the number of units, the density would be increased. That's what this application is for.
Thank you. If I may have a supplement, I'm very aware of the location of the properties, and Mr. Ordner brings up a couple of good points on increase in density. And quite frankly, I don't care if when we're looking through this report and it says that we can go ahead with the general use of this lake because we're allowed up to 20% of the total area of the lake is totally ridiculous, but that's beside the point. The proponent of this property has also purchased the property that is south of this property, and I'm just wondering if that's going to end up being part of the discussion as well. That portion of that next lot has got some environmental impact issues on it, and if we all of a sudden increase the density of this area, not only are we going to be increasing the footprint on the water surface because there's already a developed wharf already in place, but I'm wondering what other impacts we're going to have with this property on the lake. So that's just what I wanted to ask about, was whether that was including there's any future discussion on those properties, or we're just talking about that property specifically.
So no, there has been no addition of the south property, and I'm sorry, I don't know what the ownership is, so I can't comment on that. But I can comment on the zoning, that the zoning is RL, rural zoning. So commercial development in a resort is not permitted on that land, and there's been no discussion even in the future of adding it to this.
If I may also, why is if there was concerns in 2005, why have those concerns not being brought now?
I can't answer that. I know that some of the concerns related to environmental issues on the land, things like water and sewage treatment, and if there was any protected species. In 2005, so 16 years ago, then the developer had to go through an environmental report by a qualified person. So they've retained a consultant at this point to reevaluate that report, and all that would be brought forward at the public hearing.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to recommendation number 1? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Takes us to recommendation 2.
I'd like to move recommendation 2, and that's when most of this should have been brought up. But anyway, is there anything further that you would want to add to
Well,
that?
we need that.
Second.
Director Kershaw, can we perhaps get that seconded?
Yep.
And then
Yep.
has it been seconded? Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion now?
Mr. Vilkova.
So we can certainly, I get criticized for having short or long reports. We can certainly, for the public hearing report, because if this is carried and proceeds to a public hearing, we can ensure that the environmental report and everything is a part of your agenda. Sometimes these reports can be 50 pages long, so we provide them on demand to anybody who would like. We send them a link, but we can make sure we include all of that in the agenda.
Including First Nations consultation?
Yes, sir.
And would that also include the concerns, whatever they might be, raised by Mr. Ortner?
We can, I mean, we can't compel the ministry to respond, but we can certainly ask again, forward the inquiry again, and we can ask for any correspondence shared between the developer, because the developer is in conversations with Improved about second access off the Forestry Service Road with the province and an easement for that. So all of that can be brought forward at the public hearing or before the public hearing in the report.
Thank you. And Ms. Campbell?
I believe Director Singh has a comment. He's got his hand up.
Director Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was I mean, I'm kind of wondering then about this idea of having these longer reports, because then I don't know exactly what I should read and what it's optional to read. So could we keep on providing just the links if people want to read them? And then if there's, because I mean, otherwise, you know, it gets a little unwieldy to kind of figure out what's the core stuff to have to be kind of focusing on with our decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Bilkova, did you wish to respond to that?
So I just would offer on page 8, and again, this is a 13-page report, but on page 8 in big blue bold, we do say all technical reports, letters of assurance, and draft covenants are available from planning services for review. And we do this quite routinely in our reports.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your agendas would be 800 pages.
Yeah, so again, Mr. I think that's really the right way to do it. I wouldn't want to have, I think staff's doing the right thing, as they often always do in these cases. And so I'm not in favor of a longer report or a longer package. Thank you.
Thanks. Is there any further discussion respecting recommendation 2? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Move recommendation 3.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? Unopposed, that's carried. That takes us to zoning amendment bylaw number 2748 with Caribou Highway north of Cache Creek, British Columbia. There are 2 recommendations.
Move number 1.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Move number 2.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Takes us to reports, board policy update from the Director of Legislative Services. And there's a series of recommendations here. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
Move 2.
Recommendation number 2 moved and seconded. Yep. Okay, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? It's carried.
Move recommendation 3.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Rothenberger, sorry.
Just an observation in clause 2 of the proposed policy that refers to ensuring that your alternate director will not be introducing new items for discussion. But then it says a couple of sentences later, alternate directors should not introduce new items unless they have been instructed to do so by the director, which sounds either it sounds like a duplication or a conflict, whichever, but it should be worked out.
Yeah, I think so. Ms. Campbell.
Yeah, noted, Director Rothenberger. We can make that small change.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to recommendation 3? All in favor? Is anyone opposed?
Oh, I believe Director Black. Sorry.
Sorry?
Sorry, Chair Gillis, I believe Director Blackwell wanted to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry, Director
Yeah,
Blackwell.
sorry, I didn't see him.
I
till
didn't
now.
see him either.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Supplement to Director Rothenberger's question. The policy does not change for alternates attending in camera meetings, does it? Is it affected in any way from the current policy?
As far as I know, Director Blackwell, there's no change at all between an open meeting and a closed meeting with respect to alternate directors. Is that not correct, Ms. Campbell?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, further clarification, just absolute clarification. So are alternate directors now allowed to attend in-camera meetings? Because in the past, my understanding is they weren't.
Director Blackwell, I've never seen such a policy. There is currently in our procedure bylaw a provision that alternate directors may not attend committee meetings.
Okay.
In the report that we'll have to make that change. We have some other changes to bring to the procedure bylaw in the near future anyways. So with this introduction of this policy, alternate directors may attend all board and committee meetings.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? Directors Schaefer and Elliott. I think that's all that's opposed. Okay, that takes us to item 6.2, unaudited interim financial report. There's a report from the Director of Finance, Mr. Ray, and I understand that Mr. Ray is going to speak to that.
Thank you, Chair. Keeping in the spirit of best practices in providing interim financial reports to the board, this is an update of our current revenues and expenditures at a high level year to date as of June 30th. I'd hoped to get this onto the August agenda, but there was a number of things on that agenda and then it got pushed back, so it's coming to you now. And I hope to follow it up with a report on the third quarter update in the October meeting with the room on the agenda permitting. Of course, there's been a lot of activity between June 30th and now with the operation of the EOC and the wildfires and all of that was brought. I will still say that for the most part, everything is working within budget with a couple of exceptions. And that's really in the area of, well, the EOC expenditures, we will be reimbursed. There's a timing issue there. So we'll be carrying those costs until a claim is filed and we end up being reimbursed. I understand there's ongoing claims being made so that we're getting some of that money rolling in already. So it shouldn't have an overall impact on the budget, but it would have just a cash flow temporary funding impact. And the other piece is primarily in general administration, where we've been billed for some of the costs of the forensic audit that were not anticipated originally in the budget approved in March and far exceed what we had allowed for audit work. And just so you know, my intent is to see where we stand at the end of the year in terms of surplus in that service. We do have a significant amount of money in reserves in that service. So the intent would be to get approval to transfer money out of those reserves to cover those costs. So although it will use up some of the reserves, and that's one of the things those reserves is there for, is to deal with things such as that. I don't anticipate it having a significant impact on the budget otherwise. And that's any other questions?
No questions for Mr. Ray. There's a recommendation. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thanks, Mr. Ray. There is a series of recommendations with respect to our regional grants and aid for the autumn 2021 intake.
Chairman. I would like to, on the BC Wildlife Park Fund, that I very much support, and I think it's doing a good job, but I wanted to ask Mr. Ray if this would qualify under our COVID, the funding we do have for help, because I think they've been severely impacted by the COVID for fundraising and what they do out there at the park. So could this be covered by COVID funding?
Through the chair. Yeah, and later on in the report, I actually bring that up as an option for the board to consider. All four of these are not-for-profit organizations that, although the application came in under the regional grants and sponsorships program that was established as a grant and aid for specific programs they're looking at, I think it could be argued that all of them have been found themselves in a position of being unable to do the typical fundraising that they would otherwise be doing. And likely the wildlife park, I'm sure, has had a decrease in its revenues from operations. And I'm sure the same is true for all of them in terms of the other kind of fundraising activities they've typically done in the past. So I would say there's an argument that could be made should the board, should it please the board, to take the funds out of the COVID restart funding grant that we've received. There's a significant amount, a little over $400,000 of those funds that have not yet been allocated for other purposes. That the board, when we talked about it in the spring, the board said it would consider what it wanted to do with those funds. And I would suggest that is a possibility to answer your question.
Mr. Ray, where would that leave us? Supposing these did not qualify at the end of the day for COVID funding, then where would that leave us?
Well, I would still say that the money could come out of the regional grants and sponsorships program. One caveat that there's roughly 17,500 left in that budget unspent, and collectively they're asking for 18,000. So, but the other thing I point out in the report is that the request from the Interior Cutting Horse Society is for events that will take place in 2022. So if the board wanted to, it could consider approving those funds to come out of next year's budget, match it up with the year in which the events are actually taking place.
So, okay, Director Kershaw, you had a further question?
Yes, I was going to suggest that the cutting horse and that's more of it doesn't cover the whole area, and so that would be more to the directors that within the area that they have, because I think it's only in about 2 or 3 different areas. So could we put a motion forward for the staff to consider that and bring it back to the next meeting, and then we proceed on beyond that? And
I'm sorry, I wasn't quite clear on what you were proposing.
Well, the cutting horse, I don't think fits into our qualifications as really we start taking that on as a whole new project. But the BC Wildlife Park, the Canada's Exhibition Association, and the Western Canada Theatre, I think I'd like to look at it if they could be covered by COVID, and maybe staff should have a recommendation that we take this forward, that they bring us back if it qualifies for the next meeting. And then I know we don't make a decision today anyway. So as to whether they'll be covered by COVID or not.
Mr. Rader, do you wish to comment?
Well, just in terms of qualifications, the only real qualifying factor would be whether or not they had a decrease in their normal revenues, a revenue shortfall directly related to COVID. And the amounts that are asking for, I'd be really surprised if that wasn't the case.
That's me too.
So what would you recommend that we go ahead with these today and have staff consider the possibility of seeking COVID funding for them? to reimburse our fund? Or how do you think we should handle this?
We could certainly approach it that way. I could reach out to each of the organizations and ask them to provide me with some information on what their revenue shortfalls might have been. And assuming that that they line up with the grant requests, then we could take it out of the $400,000 of COVID funding that hasn't been allocated yet.
Could I make a motion to that effect? And then if we get a seconder?
Well, just a minute, Director Kershaw, there was some comment. Nothing's been moved and seconded yet.
Well, he just.
So maybe that would, if you
I'll
want to proceed
second
with
it.
recommendation number one.
I'll
Or
second.
it's all one, isn't it, Ms. Campbell?
Chair Gillis, I believe it's just, it's not an actual well, it's a recommendation that the board consider those requests. So I suspect what might come out of this is different recommendations based on what the board would like to do for the funding. So I think it would be okay for what Director Kershaw is proposing. Because I believe Mr. Ray is looking for direction from the board on whether or not the board wants to consider funding these organizations through this fund.
So we go ahead with, my question for you is that it's all one. We don't have to deal with them one at a time.
Not unless the board wishes to deal with them one at a time.
Okay, so
What is? the
Director
motion now?
Kershaw, okay. Director Rothenberger.
Just a couple of observations, really. If we approve all of these applications under the proposed regional grants and sponsorship program, that would take us over the amount available. But if we reduced the Kamloops Exhibition Association request to $2,500, which is what we have been giving them, that brings it within the available total. Secondly, the Cutting Horse Association request for $3,000 is for a saddle. I don't know why that makes me a little uncomfortable as to, the intent of these programs, but I don't think we've ever bought a saddle for anyone before. And maybe it falls within our usual parameters. I don't know, but it just seems like a bit of an interesting one to me.
Sorry, Chair, I see Director Blackwell and Roden have had their hands up for quite some time.
Okay, thank you. Director Blackwell?
Yeah, I was just trying to get your attention so that you could answer Director Roden's question, but my understanding of these events is that the saddle is the equivalent of a trophy. So that's what you're actually paying for. You're not necessarily buying a working saddle for somebody's horse. And with that, that's the end of my comment. And I'm glad to see that you've acknowledged Director Roden as well.
Thanks, Director Roden.
Thank you. A couple of points. Director Ray, am I correct in recalling that the COVID Safe Restart funding has to be allocated, but not necessarily spent by the end of this year? And if that is the case, what happens if that 400,000 has not been allocated?
Well, first of all, you're correct. That was the requirement from the province when we received the money in the cover letter, was that the money had to be allocated by the end of 2021, but not necessarily spent. We just need to have a plan on how it's going to be spent. And when it was discussed in the spring, there was a certain amount that the will of the board at that time was that we would consider it and come back to it later in the year. So that still needs to come back to the board for discussion between now and the end of the year. We were considering bringing it back in conjunction with the provisional budget so that you could look at it all together. And the other part of your question, what happens if we haven't allocated it? That's a good question, because there hasn't really been anything spelled out. They haven't asked us to report to them on how we've allocated it. The requirement at this point is that we put an unaudited schedule attached to our annual audited financial statements that says, here's the amount we've received, here's what we've spent to date and what it's been spent on, and here's how much is available to carry forward to the future. That's all they've requested at this point for reporting. But that's not to say they couldn't at some point, perhaps in January, come back to us and say, okay, please report to us on how everything was allocated. And in general, with these funds, the impression I've gotten is, what are the consequences? Well, if we're not playing by the rules, it endangers our chances at future funding.
So a supplemental question to that, thank you. If there were a motion, for example, to direct you to approach the organizations to see if they could supply more information, to see if they qualify under the Safe Restart funding, and if in fact they did, and the board decided that that's where the funding would come from, would that leave us the money in the fund that they're currently applying for other people that aren't necessarily COVID related, the sort of more normal request for funding that we would get in a normal year?
Not exactly, but close. What it would do is it would leave that money in the regional grants and sponsorships budget line unspent. The budget would be topped up back to the annual amount next year. So what it would do is reduce the amount of taxes required to top it up. If we spend it all this year, we have to tax more to top it up next year. If we spend less this year, we don't add to the budget, but we simply have to tax less.
Right, thank you. And just one last thing. My understanding from discussions around the Safe Restart funding is that a lot of local governments and regional districts are choosing to use the funding from the Safe Restart to reduce the tax burden on its taxpayers' residents. So that would be the case in this instance then if we went that route.
Well, again, being careful about that, one of the stipulations that the province put in with the grant funds is that they may not be used to directly reduce property taxes. In other words, they didn't want to see a local government say, we're just going to apply it directly. We're going to plug this into our budget and tax less. And we're just giving everyone a reduced tax bill for 1 year. But that doesn't mean that if we're applying it to provide grants for legitimate purposes, that doesn't save the TNRD tax dollars it would otherwise have to spend. They just didn't want that to be the end goal of how it was being used. So if we are funding something that has a legitimate direct correlation with COVID that would in all other ways have to be funded through property taxes, I think that's an indirect consequence of it. But I'd be very careful to say that, we're applying it to reduce property taxes.
Right, no, sorry, I wasn't clear and I apologize for that. No, I meant that the indirect effect, as you said, is that property taxes are reduced. No one's trying to do an end run around anything, but that is the indirect effect of using the money, the COVID Safe Restart funding, as opposed to this particular community fund.
Yes, and I guess what I would simply say is that when I was writing or editing the report, the main options available to the board are to either approve or not approve the application from the regional grants and sponsorships budget. A second option would be to look at it and say, maybe it doesn't fit the profile for that program, that we think there's more limited benefits to location, and perhaps it should be funded out of the electoral areas discretionary funds instead. And third, because of the situation with these being not-for-profits who likely have had significant shortfalls in revenue, and that being one of the things specifically mentioned by the province as being an eligible use of COVID funds, I put that in the report simply as another option the board to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Elliott, Schaefer, Stamer, and Kershaw. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I gather that the other 4-H association got a barrier did not apply, but I'd like to go back, to have this one go back to $2,500, the same as we've done that for the last several years. And as far as the Cutting Horse Association, I have a problem buying a saddle for a whatever they're going to use the saddle for. It's for a present, basically, and they are really not very non-profitable. So I don't think I would like to see them get money from the COVID fund. If we want to fund them through our other fund, that's fine, but I don't approve of them having money through the COVID.
Thanks, Director Schaefer.
I agree that I don't think that we should be buying a saddle. And I also agree that it should be down to 2,500 because that's what we ended up giving 4-H and barrier for the Kamloops Exhibition Association.
Director Stammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm sort of on the same lines as Director Elliott. I had a couple of questions to Mr. Ray. If our policy is that we're only giving up to 5,000 per year, 10,000 maximum in a 4-year period, and again, I'm not trying to step on any toes here, but with the Kamloops Exhibition Association getting their grant in 2020 from the Arts and Cultural Electoral Area Discretionary Funds, what is the criteria in those funds? Is this just a loophole, or how does that fund work?
So there's a separate policy around those electoral area funds. The policy dictates who can receive or who's eligible. Basically, you need to be a formal not-for-profit, formally organized not-for-profit organization. And it shouldn't go for ongoing operating costs year after year. It should be more for one-off events. Although in the past, there have been multiple one-off events with the same organizations. There is no cap other than the budget on it. It's really up to the area directors as to how much they feel is appropriate to provide to any one group and how frequently. As I said, the intent is not to provide funding to any one group over and over and over again for operating funds. That would effectively circumvent the process that if we want to do that, we should be going through a public assent process and establishing a specific service for that purpose. When we created the regional grants and sponsorships, this is a little different because it's being funded for the entire TNRD and not from one electoral area. And I know that one of the issues in the past has been funding for these types of grants being provided from taxpayers from the entire regional district, where one or more municipality might be already directly funding the group. We started off several years ago with a policy that basically said the TNRD does not provide grants or sponsorships as from the region as a whole. And we only had those electoral area funds, with the idea being that if someone wanted funding from the member municipalities, they should be going and approaching that member municipality and having the mayor and council make that decision. Over time, the board found itself granting sponsorships or grants out of general administration where the entire TNRD was paying that. And the direction staff received is, well, our policy doesn't match what we've been doing, so let's change the policy. And as we went through that process, we created this fund, which the idea of putting those dollar limits and the amount of frequency people could come to apply was to prevent it from becoming a go-to pot of money every single year, and also limit a little bit people coming to the TNRD for grants funded by the entire region where they may also be receiving money from member municipalities at the same time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, I just wanted to add is that I agree. I mean, we've got sort of like competing, competing shows now between the Exhibition Association and the Agricultural Exposition Society. And I'm just thinking that they've all been affected by COVID, and I'm just hoping that, BC Agricultural Exposition Society gets the same opportunities as the KXA does or the KEA does. And yeah, if we can use money, as Director Kershaw said, through the COVID for this one-time event, then I'm all for it. But I certainly want to make sure that all those organizations are on the same playing field. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add one point there, I'm sorry, I forget the name of the organization, the BC Agriculture. They did apply because we do 2 intakes per year with this one. Yeah, and so they did apply and receive funding in the spring already.
Director Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, that's what I was going to come back at. So as a mover of the motion, I was thinking we could cut that back and cut out the Interior Cutting Horse Association and bring the KXA down to the 2,500, the same as Ag Expo. And so the motion would just cover the 3. And I'd like to point out the reason that we do sponsor and support the Ag Expo and the KXA is the fact that it's 4-H. We're only supporting the 4-H section of the show, not an overall agriculture exhibition. It's just in support of 4-H, which is major within the whole interior. So if it's okay with the seconder, I'd like to reduce that, take the Cutting Horse Association out of that and put it to $2,500 to the Camel's Exhibition Association and make it fair for both associations. They're not competing anymore. They're just 2 different 4-H shows, and do it that way.
Mr. Chair, as a seconder, I agree.
You agree, Director
Yes.
Elliott? Thank you. Director Watson.
Thank you. Before we cut one group completely out, I'd like to make sure I have all the information. Director Elliott, you said they were non-profitable or not non-profitable?
What I said they were not, and I don't know what their society says, but the Cutting Association of British Columbia is well financed.
And this is the Cutting Association of the Interior. So it's an interior group. Do you know that they are not a registered not-for-profit?
I don't know. I belong to them for a long time, and as far as I know, they aren't. But obviously, if they say they are, they are.
I'm wondering, before we cut somebody out, do we know everything that we need to know?
I would suggest, Director Watson, that there is a lot of other nonprofits that probably have lost more money than the Cutting Horse Association. And if they only want some money to buy a saddle, and I think that 4-H kids are more deserving. That's my personal opinion.
Oh, okay. No, thank you.
Director Quinn.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to move an amendment, but it looks like the mover and seconder have already done it. Do we need an amendment? We don't. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then there's a motion before you, as I understand. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Schaefer.
I just wanted to ask a question about that Interior Cutting Association. Because it's only 4 electoral area directors, if they all got together, they could put forward the money too, couldn't they?
Absolutely. There's nothing stopping any director from any area of contributing discretionary funds to that. As far as I know, no block to that. Is there, Mr. Ray?
No, that would be up to the directors. And I'll just add very quickly, on the application form, we asked them to identify the specific areas of the TNRD that they think will benefit from this program that they're applying for. And I mean, we haven't had a lot of applications come in because it's still a fairly new program, but I think sometimes the organizations are underestimating it. They're indicating certain areas that they think are going to be, that they're afraid of really exaggerating, I guess. But I think some of these events probably bring in people from all over the TNRD, but they haven't necessarily identified that in the application. And I don't go back to them and argue with them about that. I let them provide the information as they see fit.
Thank you. Then is there any, Director Brown?
In response to Director Watson's question, the Interior Cutting Horse Association does not have a society number on their application form.
Thank you. Excuse me. So you have before you, as I understand it, a recommendation that we proceed to fund the British Columbia Wildlife Park in the amount of $5,000, the Kamloops Exhibition Association in the amount of $2,500, the Western Canada Theatre in the amount of $5,000, and further that staff be directed to see if those funds can be, if COVID-19 funds can be applied to that, but failing in that, that these grants should go ahead in any event. Is that correct, Ms. Campbell?
Well done, Mr. Chair. That's perfect.
Thank you. Now, if I can get Director Rothenberger's name right, we'll be away to the races. Director Duty.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, since we're obviously looking at a different area for funding by going through the COVID Relief Fund, would the BC Wildlife Park have to be limited to $5,000? Because you're not using the same type of funding with the same criteria.
Well, that's what the BC Wildlife has applied for. So I don't know that if it were a different pot of money, I don't think they would be restricted.
Well,
but
that's the reason I ask, is that if they're following the criteria that we have set out in this regional grants and sponsorship program, they're limited to the 5,000. But I'm assuming they probably need more money than that. So if we're taking it from a completely different pot and they meet the standards that are set out for them, is there a possibility they could have more to be able to go ahead with this vet hospital?
Mr. Ray?
I see your point. I guess what I could do is a follow up when I'm getting more information. I could suggest that if they actually think that they would like to apply for a greater amount, that we could bring that amount and request back to the board.
Director Sinclair.
Thank you, Chair. Respectfully, I think then if that is extended to the wildlife park, then it should also be extended to the other applicants.
Couldn't agree with you more. So is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the recommendation as I outlined earlier? Is anyone opposed? 1, 2, looks like 3 on the screen and none in the room. 1 in the room, sorry. So that's carried. Wow. That takes us to building permit activity report. Would somebody wish to move it to be received for information? Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. I think that takes us to internal committees. Audit Committee, Director Rain.
No meeting, no report.
Economic Development and Recreation Services, Director Roden.
Chair Gillis, yes, we had a meeting yesterday. We heard from Community Forest Association. We heard from Mr. Hegan regarding the filming in the TNRD, and that was supplemented by a fulsome report from the Film Commissioner. My big takeaway from that was that in 2020 and 2021, there has been almost $9 million spent by film companies in the TNRD region. This does not take into account individual spending by cast and crew members. In 2020, There were 16 projects filming over 79 shooting days in the region. So far this year, there have been 13 projects, so slightly fewer, but with 161 shooting days in the region. A lot of these, since the pandemic, a lot of these companies are BC-based films, some of them leaving the Lower Mainland because of the expenses. As Mr. Hegan noted, it's much less expensive to film in Kamloops, for example, than it is to shut down a street in Vancouver if you need to do that for your film. And that another big spin-off from these BC productions is that many of them are willing to hire locals and to train on the job, which is building up our pool of available experienced talent for other film companies.
Thanks, Director Roden. Electoral Area Directors, Director Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a meeting yet this morning, and there will be recommendations coming to our next regular board meeting.
Thank you. Emergency Management Protective Services, Director Watson. Microphone, Director Watson.
I know of no meeting.
Policy Review, Director Sinclair.
Thank you, Chair. We met yesterday. It was a very efficient meeting at 37 minutes. And there will be some follow-ups. We discussed policy around disposal of assets, anti-racism and anti-racial discrimination, and respectful workplace. So there is more work to do, but you will be hearing from us soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Regional Solid Waste Management, Director Schaefer.
No meeting, no report.
Thompson-Nicola Invasive Plant Management, Director Kershaw.
No meeting, no report.
Thompson Regional Hospital District, Director Christian.
No meeting, no report.
Utility Systems Committee, Director Elliott.
No report.
Thompson Headwaters, Director Quinn.
Minutes, move for receive for information.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Wells Gray Country Services, Director Schaefer.
We had a meeting on Tuesday night and we dealt with the budget, but the minutes will be forthcoming.
Thank you. Joint Services Committee, Director Schaefer again.
We had a meeting September the 13th and the minutes will be forthcoming. And we'd like to make a recommendation that the minutes of May the 17th be done for information.
Seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Takes us to external committees. Fraser Basin Council, Director Rice.
The meeting was canceled. We'll have our next meeting in November.
Thank you. Municipal Finance Authority, Director Brown.
We did have our semi-annual meeting, and surprisingly, the organization has made more money than they anticipated last year. They have new issue of funds out, and we did approve a loan for the town of Clinton.
Thank you. Or maybe I should have left the thank you to Director Swan. I don't know.
A huge thank you.
Municipal Insurance Association, Director Duty.
The AGM was held during UBCM week and the minutes are to follow.
Thank you. Shuswap Watershed Council, Director Crow.
Thank you, Chair. Director Christian and I attended the last meeting. Staff facilitated the development of a Shuswap Regional Algal Bloom Response Plan. The Water Quality Grant Program renewal was approved as only $26,000 of the $85,000 budget was allocated. A second round of grant applications was recommended to take place in November. Staff has begun the development of a phosphorus action plan for the Shuswap watershed as well. And that's my report.
Thank you, Director Crow. Kamloops Airport Authority, Director Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Kamloops Airport has had a very busy summer with fire activity. 30 to 40 helicopters on site, military to the south side of the airport, and fire traffic triple regular fire seasons. Significant impacts to the air, traffic end of July from smoke. Air passenger traffic still remaining low, but August was up over August of 2020. 2,053 in 2020, 10,000 in 2021, which is better. With restrictions on the airports permitted to accept international flights still in effect, Kamloops Airport is looking at opportunities to help Sun Peaks with travel from Eastern Canada. And I don't know if Director Rothenberger has, Director Christian has anything to add to that or not.
No, I think you've captured it all, Director Kershaw.
Well, thank you both. Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Director Singh.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
We most assuredly can.
So, Mr. Chair, remember the last meeting we were together, you were calling me Mr. Director Quinn most of the meeting. Do you remember that? Anyways, since then, my life's gotten a little bit interesting. I've been, anyways, I've been back with the hospital, so I'm not with you today, but the FCM board meetings are happening as we speak. And I've been attending meetings as I can. Obviously, we all know it's a federal election, federal election on Monday, and it resulted in the same result we had before, a little minority government. The FCM had a election platform, and now they usually do 100 days for the new government. However, that's going to be constituted with help from other parties. Unfortunately, I was unable to be at my environmental and sustainable development meeting yesterday, which I was supposed to chair, which is kind of a bit of a bummer. But my colleague from Quebec, Councillor Maisonneuve from Quebec, did it very, very well, I understand. Today, there was a meeting of the Social and Environment Committee, a Social and Economic Committee for FCM, and also the Women's Getting More Women Involved with Local Government Committee. And I did attend the full committee meeting on getting women more involved with local government. And there are actually funding programs coming out of FCM that help local governments encourage more women to run. So that's one thing. And I will give you a quick impromptu RH report. The people up here are amazing, doing very, very good work. They're understaffed, as we all know, but they've been giving me very good care. And I'll see you all soon.
Thanks ever so much, Director. And Director Quinn, I was just saying, and we wish you a speedy recovery. That brings us to Community Energy Association Director Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No meeting. Just a note, though, I just read a news article that Clearwater is getting a Tesla supercharger station at our local shopping mall here. So I just randomly applied for it on the internet, and it showed up in the mail like an unwanted parcel. So that's good news that we actually got some action somewhere on something.
Thanks, Director Blackwell. That brings us to correspondence. We have a couple of pieces of correspondence where action is requested. The first is from the Kamloops Wildlife Park Society, and they want a letter of support for the Fawcett Family Wildlife Health Center.
Move a letter of support.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? There's no one opposed. That's carried. And Tricia Thorpe has requested a public meeting for residents in the Lytton area impacted by the wildfire. And there is correspondence there that you've undoubtedly read, dated the 4th of September. Is there any motion coming with respect to that, or where are we with her letter? Yes, Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have corresponded with this particular individual, and despite what the letter says, and it was late, but I did send some stuff off to her. I also had a conversation with Scott about this particular situation, and so we have had discussions around whether there needs to be a public meeting, you know, with the TNRD and stuff, and I don't think anything's actually been decided yet and stuff like that, but she has been in contact with myself, and I have not yet heard back from Tricia myself from my correspondence either. So it's a situation where, you know, Lytton's in a unique situation. So at some point in time, I think there needs to be some conversation with the folks of Lytton that still have homes there. This is what this lady, she did not lose her home, nor did some of the people in the Botany Valley where she's from. So we do need to have that conversation down the road, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Director Rice. Ms. Campbell, you seemed on the verge of pushing a button there.
Sorry, Chair Gillis, I was actually just going to defer to Director Rice to comment on this because I know he has actually now been in touch with Tricia.
So is there any further discussion on this matter? I'm not seeing none. Nobody has moved that we arrange a public meeting. So I guess it dies right there on the order paper, as they say. So the next is the Gold Country Communities Association. They're requesting a letter of support for a grant funding application. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. So that takes us to information only. There are 4 letters for information only.
Move receipt, Director Singh.
Is there any discussion? Director Stamer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to point out the one letter from Ms. McLean, and I hope everybody read it. I just wanted to quote this one part of her letter that says, without changes in fire management practices, climate change may lead to fire seasons that overwhelm fire suppression agencies. Significant changes may be required in the future as the current status quo may no longer be a viable option in areas facing increasing extreme fire weather. So I think that's a well thought out letter, and I know that we all have concerns here and what happened throughout the fire season with just about every single municipality impacted either with an alert or an order from this fire season. And so I just wonder where we go from here. Thank you.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairman, if we wish to discuss letters in the information, we should take it out of it and put it on the table. So I would so move we take the letter from Ms. McLean out of the information for discussion.
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. So that leaves the 3 information only, and it's been moved and seconded that they be received for information only. Is there any discussion, any further discussion with respect to the remaining 3 letters?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I again noticed that Director Roden's hand's up.
I'm sorry?
Director Roden's hand is up.
Oh, sorry, Director Roden.
Thank you. This is actually, I guess a bit too late getting in for the Lytton discussion. If it's too late to talk about that, then that's fine.
Yeah, I think that's already been dealt with. I'm sorry, Director Roden.
Okay.
Did you have your hand up during that? I'm sorry, because I certainly didn't see it from here.
It was a comment. It wasn't a motion. It was just an observation, if you will.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us to 823, the letter from Ms. McLean. Oh, I'm sorry. Then all in favor of receiving the correspondence? That's carried. And that takes us to the letter from Ms. McLean. Is there any further discussion with respect to her letter? Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, apologies that I didn't do that. I pretty much said what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further comment with respect to the letter from Ms. McLean? Director Elliott.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just refer to Director Stamer as to what he thinks we should do with this letter.
Thank you, Director Elliott. Well, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's on the same page in as much as that we talked about previously about a possible task force, or at least trying to get to the bottom of some of the stuff that happened this summer. And we can go around in circles and spend a long time discussing this. But the reality is that I think there was a lot of mistakes that were made this summer. And I think that we should be looking at ways of trying to improve not only what happened, but what we can do in the future. And so, you know, this is already the end of September, then it'll be in October, November, Christmas. And I think that we should be able to try to figure out amongst ourselves if there's a willingness for us to try to get to the bottom of some of this stuff and see if we're actually going to be able to talk to the people that are responsible, see if they're willing to look at some of the previous recommendations from 2003 and 2017, find out exactly what's being acted upon, what's not being acted upon, and what we can do going forward until we burn the rest of the timber and our communities down. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would like to follow that up with asking if we could have a task force to look into that very thing.
Good.
I was already speaking because I asked Director Stamer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's correct.
So I would like to suggest that we strike a task force to look into the summer fires and what it has done and what needs to be improved, and that you be the person who puts, who decides what that task force will be, or you and the CAO.
So is that a motion?
Chair Gillis, sorry if I may interrupt respectfully. I'm just a bit concerned that this is a fairly heavy request and motion, and I'm feeling like this really should be an actual notice of motion put forward by one of the directors and perhaps discussed and debated at another meeting. I think it falls within our notice of motion definition of something that's quite substantial or that may impact other agencies, other government agencies. So if Director Elliott, I can speak with you after on how to put forward a notice of motion, and if you would need any assistance with crafting it, I can assist with that as well.
That sounds good, because I was just about to ask Director Elliott if that task force should not include members from outside this board. I would assume that it should. So Director Watson.
Asked and answered.
Thank you. Director Rothenberger.
I was just going to observe that I'm certain there will be a provincial task force and another 6-month study and another report coming out probably sometime next spring, which, might be a bit slow, but probably a lot of our answers will be, or a lot of questions will be answered from whatever happens provincially. But if we feel that there are aspects of the season and the operation that are specific to the TNRD that only we can deal with, then yes, our own task force is worth discussing. But I think it might be to some extent at least a duplication of what the province is certain to do.
Thank you, Director Quinn.
Just procedurally, I seconded that motion. Do we need to withdraw the motion to put it forward as a notice of motion for the next meeting? And do we need to put a date to it?
No, Director Quinn, because it should have been a notice of motion, so we can just strike that, it just die, and then Director Elliott and I can touch base. And Chair Gillis, I believe Director Singh has his hand up as well when you have a moment.
Director Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was also going to say that following on Director Rothenberger's comments, the province is sure to do their own study, I imagine, and we also have that Emergency Practices Act committee that UBCM and the province, and I'm involved in that committee. One of the larger issues here is the whole issue on climate action and climate change. And obviously, I think, Ms. McLean's letter talks about very eloquently that climate change has become a force multiplier of these kind of events. And it's very well established now that the wildfire seasons we've had, climate change was a massive contributing factor, as well as the heat dome. So I was talking to our CEO, actually, it's been offline, and co-directors about actually the possibility of us having a climate action committee at the board where we could actually discuss these issues and also in a broader context, because I really think BC Wildfire is doing its best, but I think they have got, we're all in a situation now where Mother Nature is much more angry than she ever was, and we've got to kind of figure out how to engage with that. So whether that's how we fire smart rural areas, smaller communities, big communities, how we look at our own emissions as a region, those are issues that we can really talk about as well. So I was actually going to bring a notice of motion myself next meeting around that. So maybe we can kind of put our heads together and talk about how we can actually have some task force or committees that actually really are well aligned with what the province is doing, well aligned with our own desires, and move forward from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Singh. Director Schaefer.
I would just like to know, staff must be getting together to have meetings to find out how to improve. Because this letter is quite a bit to do with BC wildfire, and just still some here for you guys to, but I'm sure you guys are meeting to see how improvements can be done. So why would we need a task force?
All I can add through you, Mr. Chair, is that we are doing debriefing meetings on a number of topics, and that those dates are upcoming. But this would be a board decision, I guess, on a task force that's on the table.
Thank you, Director Schaefer. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I disagree with what Director Singh says. I know this is a public forum, but I can disagree on a lot of things that happened this summer, particularly on the response. And I don't necessarily want to wait for another task force or / report from the BC government to identify some of the shortfalls in not only what we did when we had a fire, but how we responded and after the fact. And we've got a lot of local examples of how what they have in their planning system and the way that they respond is not working, period, end stop. And so unless we get to the bottom of some of this stuff, they're just going to paper it over and give us another report and put 2021 or 2022 on it, and nothing's going to change. And so that's what I'm trying to say is I'm not trying to point fingers. I'm just trying to say that there's a lot of things that could be changed. There's a lot of recommendations that have not been followed in both those 2003 and 2017. I'd like to get to the bottom of some of it without trying to be politically correct and say, well, let somebody else deal with it. Thank you.
Director Watson.
Yes, on the subject of our staff is already working on what to do better. This has very little to do with our staff. Our staff doesn't fight fires. And some of the coordination and who ordered what and stuff like that are the questions that need to be answered.
Director Quinn. Okay, Director Roden.
Thank you. I mean, I've talked to senior staff through the summer or since fire season started about a debriefing. And I agree with those who've said we had the Philman report in 2003, the Abbott Chapman report in 2017-18, the whatever it's going to be called report for 2021, which is coming. I think what would be more helpful to the TNRD, as I see it, would be a debriefing on the level of the TNRD. And I'm going to kind of sneak my Lytton thing in here by saying that one of the things I saw a lot was the lack of knowledge of residents as to who does what at every level and where they fit, because you had people who were First Nations, people who are electoral area residents, people who are municipal residents. And I think a lot of the frustration in Lytton is coming from the fact that you have all three of those levels involved, and people see friends and neighbors getting back on properties and they're wondering why they can't. Like, why can't I go back onto my property when people a mile down the road are getting back onto theirs? So a debriefing could maybe look at, and this isn't the fault of the TNRD, it's just how do we get that education piece out there? I would really like to see a debriefing because I think staff did a fantastic job. Can everyone do better? Obviously all the time, but I don't want it to be okay, we didn't do this, we didn't do that, we didn't do the other. I think it would be more helpful to look at how we can educate people for the next time this happens so that you don't get that confusion, adding to the stress, fueling the anger and the depression. To me, that would be what I'd like to see, whether you call it a task force, a committee, a commission, a standing committee, a debriefing, whatever form that takes, but just something that is going to be more concrete and helpful to residents of the TNRD moving forward while we wait for the province to come out with another lengthy report about the fire season.
Chair, point of order. We're now debating a notice of motion that hasn't come before us yet.
I think that's a good point of order. And we do seem to be debating that. And we seem to be going outside the parameters of that notice of motion as well. So we don't need a we don't need a motion here with respect to the notice of motion. There will be one forthcoming. And I agree, and I think it's time to terminate the debate on this particular question. That takes us to do business for members. Right, Director Rice.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Chair. Just one quick thing. First of all, I want to make a note on staff, and like was mentioned, staff did a pretty dang good job, in my opinion, through this wildfire thing. And I want to do a special shout out to both Deanna and Scott, who are tag teaming with me almost on a daily basis, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. And they got back to me within minutes most times. And you know, it was very anxiety ridden situation, and with all the telecommunications, especially when they went down and nobody could get out, and not just Spence's Bridge, all the way down Highway 8 to where 45 poles bit the dust, and about 12.5 kilometers of fiber optic cable bit the dust, disintegrated. And that's pretty dangerous when you've got a seniors community and there's no way to communicate. We did have a medical emergency. Was a bit of a problem because there was no way you could call anybody. They had to get in their car. The wife had to get in the car. Her husband was in trouble, and they ran down the fire chief, ran down a first responder, which happened to be my wife, and they went over. And Gary has since passed away, not because of that incident, but it was a serious injury. And so I don't. In that situation, what TELUS did was nothing short of remarkable. Through Deanna, Scott, myself, Melanie Barony, I would like a letter of thanks to go out to TELUS and Melanie Barrett and her team in particular for the above and beyond the call, because they thought they could get it done in a week. I did telecommunications for 16 years. I told them they were out of their minds, and they got it done in a week. On Wednesday, the next week, people started getting phone calls. They were sporadic. By Thursday, they had it completely. They laid the line, the fiber optic line, on the ground. They put up poles. They had to dig trenches and driveways, but they got it done to get us. We still have that service today in Spence's Bridge. They'll someday have to go out and put up those poles and put it up permanent, but it was a heroic effort. So I would just like, we lost our cell, our landlines, and our internet. There's literally no, I was driving 15 kilometers every day in the morning and the afternoon to communicate at the last spike, appropriately named down there on the way to Cache Creek. So I would just like this board to support a letter of thanks to TELUS for their efforts to restore telecommunications to our community.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And I take it, Director Rice, you'll provide the relevant information to staff so that that letter can be prepared. Thank you. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's certainly, I don't raise to speak with any pleasure. A letter to Michael,
How are you doing?
to Minister Farnworth about a situation in Blue River involving the Little House Warriors blockading roads and occupying Crown land. There was very little done. However, Trans Mountain has provided quite a bit of security for that. My biggest concern at that time would it escalate into violence, and that has now happened. On the 15th of September, while we were UBCMing, there was an attack, I guess, on the workers' construction camp in Blue River. It resulted in more than $75,000 worth of property damage, and one security personnel went to hospital. He is now recovering at home. I'd like to ask the board if they will consider sending a letter to Premier Horgan, Minister Conroy, who is the Highways Minister, and Minister Conroy is the Lands Minister, and Mr. Fleming, the Highways Minister, and ask them to immediately get personally involved and get this situation resolved before the violence escalates to any further than it has. And I would make a motion, and I hope to get some support for that.
I will second that motion.
Thanks, Director Blackwell. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? It's carried. Director Quinn, is there any further new business from members? Not seeing any. There's no notice of motion. There's no one for a question period, Ms. Campbell?
Let me just check if there's anyone on Zoom that has any questions. Doesn't appear to be, Chair.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item 12. There's a requirement for a closed meeting, and I'll entertain a motion that we.
So move.
Okay. We're moving at a closed meeting, and we will take a break for 10 minutes and resume our deliberations.